Jerusalem. We walked through the Jaffa Gate at sunset, and I was aware of a trembling down my spine, and through the marrow of my thigh bones. Even to me this high reward had been granted. In swift procession, the pageantry of the city's past swept through my brain. I saw it rise in its pride and fall to its ruin. I heard its street cries come down the centuries, the canticles of Solomon, the lamentations of Jeremiah, the voice of the priest and the voice of the prisoner. I went a few steps down David's street. The narrow way, about the breadth of 3 mules across, was already lighted. Up and down its pavements passed an endless stream of men with the predatory scavenger faces of Oriental townsmen. I saw a camel come stepping fast, lifting its long legs with slow deliberation as though it walked in its sleep. We were staying at the American colony outside the walls under Mount Scopus, so that before we went back we called for our letters. They contained ill news. The next morning we set out to visit the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It is a fine building, its outside more impressive than I had expected. I admired certain of the capitals carved with flowers, which surmounted the original pillars of St. Helena's Church. It also interested me to see in the sloping passage leading down to the cave where the true cross was found, the innumerable tiny cruciform scratches carved on the stones by crusading pilgrims. The surface of the walls on both sides was fretted with these tiny symbols. I sat for a long time in front of the Holy Sepulchre before going in. The edifice which surrounds it was decorated like a booth in a circus. It was covered with banners and other bright-coloured hangings, and there were also lamps suspended about it. When at last we went into the tomb itself, holding long, thin tallow tapers between finger and thumb, we were sadly disappointed. The original grave was completely concealed by slabs of white marble put into position comparatively recently. The spirit of Jesus was not here, and never had been here, and that I knew. Where there is one alone, I say I am with him. Lift up the stone, and thou shalt find me. Cleave the wood, and I am there. I had come from Dorset to have a look at the legended tomb about which there had been so much talk. It was nothing. The veriest chicanery. A prinked-up conjuring trick. I wanted to examine the particular loculus that had once held the body of Jesus. I would have liked to lower my candle to see more clearly the native rock that had sheltered like the most precious shell fossils the beloved bones of the great poet. It was useless. There was nothing to be seen. It was a nesting place for masquerading rogues. The next morning we set out to visit the Dome of the Rock and the Aqsa Mosque. It was Friday, and we found that Christians were forbidden entrance to the ancient temple area on that day. Presently, as we sauntered through the narrow, crowded alleys, my eye lit upon the figure of a dwarf. This homuncule was bustling along the pavement with great purpose. He was dressed in a long black coat under the tail of which brown stockings were visible. His shoes were too big for him, and as he walked he made a slip-a-slop sound. I never saw his face, but as my eyes followed his humped shoulders disappearing in the distance, I could not prevent myself speculating about the background of his life. Where had he slept last night? In what attic under a flat roof had he been dreaming while the waning moon had floated down the sky? Where was he off to now with all this hurry? We came upon a vegetable market and stood to watch the vendors. Many Arab girls in gay clothes were sitting near their baskets of garden produce. Their eyes were bright, their bangles shining. I saw them sell radishes of a very large size. Arab men in rough homespun garments stood about. They carried staves in their hands. There was something imperious in their bearing. They seemed superior to the city life, as if they had come to Jerusalem from some far-off desert village with green date palms overtopping white mud walls. I came close to one of them and noticed the separate threads of his unmanufactured tunic. A curious smell came from him. It was like stale mare's milk mixed with the smoke of a campfire. They looked at us with cold attention as hawks look at pigeons. We went to visit the Wailing Wall, reaching it down a narrow winding lane past some daubed hovels. Once we had rounded the last corner, we were confronted by a memorable scene. The wall's far higher than I had imagined it to be. It is the very wall of the old temple, built at its base of stupendous Herodian stones. They seemed to me bigger than any stones I'd ever seen used for building. Enormous grey masses of obdurate matter, upon whose broad backs had rested the burden of 2,000 years. Some of them may well have had a place in the Temple of Solomon even before they had been utilised for that later temple, which the Jews in contempt will want to refer to as Herod's building. That morning there were some 50 Jews assembled, each one of them crooning out his lamentations. They swayed backward and forward in front of the masonry in a kind of sexual ecstasy. They kissed the dumb blocks. They laid the palms of their hands flat against them. They howled like dogs against a shut door. Their furred gabardines flapped. They pleaded. They sent up supplications. The problem of the dwarf was solved. Here was his journey's end. He let his frustrated spirit fly loose from his deformed body. This ceremony was his ceremony. Here he could take his share with his fellows on equal terms, could be at one with that row of fantastic, frantic mourners. What memories these Jews have. Was there ever such a people? It is impossible to kill them. It is impossible to beat them away. The same emotion that troubled them in Babylon troubles them still. How the obstinate wretches shook with curled locks at their God. In the long fingers of the dwarf I saw an old 18th century book, tattered and soiled. He kept turning its pages as he muttered and screeched out the words of the prayer. I was afterward diligent to find a translation of the service, some of the lines of which I got by heart. For the palace that lies desolate, we sit in solitude and mourn. For the temple that is destroyed, we sit in solitude and mourn. For the walls that are overthrown, we sit in solitude and mourn. For our majesty that is departed, we sit in solitude and mourn. For our great men who lie dead, we sit in solitude and mourn. For the precious stones that are buried, we sit in solitude and mourn. For the priests who have stumbled, we sit in solitude and mourn. For our kings who have despised him, we sit in solitude and mourn. We pray thee, have mercy on Zion. Gather the children of Jerusalem. Haste, haste, Redeemer of Zion. Speak to the heart of Jerusalem. May beauty and majesty surround Zion. Ah, turn thyself mercifully to Jerusalem. May the kingdom soon return to Zion. Comfort those who mourn over Jerusalem. May peace and joy abide with Zion, and the branch spring up at Jerusalem.